Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Decryption and I hope you are well. Timed dialogue is a very common concept across many games such as Detroit Become Human, Cyberpunk and many more. It gives the player a sense of urgency when they're making decisions in dialogue. Typically dialogue, you just see your options and you have an infinite amount of time to pick whichever one you want. With a timed response in tense situations, causes the player to react quicker and they may end up picking an option they weren't 100% comfortable with, but it adds to the realism of the situation. And in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a timed dialogue inside narrative, which is going to be completely reusable across the entire game, and you can turn it on and off per dialogue and multiple times in a single dialogue. So let's get started. So the first thing you're going to need in order to do this is you're going to need a master dialogue, because if you want it to run across multiple dialogues, you need a single place to store the variables. If you've not created a master dialogue yet, simply come into wherever you store your dialogue and create a new empty dialogue and just call it master dialogue or anything like that. And then all you need to do is whenever you open up your dialogue, so I'm going to open up Hiroshi's, make sure that if you come to the class settings, just set your parent class to your master dialogue. Now, if you just open up your master dialogue, you will see it will look just like a normal dialogue. Nothing will be majorly different. You can see I've added something here for my previous character, so we can just ignore that. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to come up and create a variable. So the variable I'm going to create is one where we actually put the length of time the player has to answer each option. So I'm going to create a variable called player timed response time, and I'm going to set it to a float, because then we can have incremental 0.5 seconds if we really want it. And now I can compile and save. And you'll notice if you come back to your other dialogue, and as long as you have the parent class set, inside the class defaults you will see you now have a player timed response time variable. So I can come and set this to anything I want, but it's not currently going to do anything. So we need to actually plug it in to make it work on the UI and then select the options automatically. So to do this, I'm going to hit Control or Command P and I'm going to search for narrative default UI and I'm going to open that. So the first thing we're going to do is actually set up the progress bar. So in the narrative default UI here, you can see you have two boxes in the middle. The bottom box here is where the player's options are listed, so you can put it above or below anywhere you want. I'm going to simply just add a progress bar above the player reply box, and then I can just pimp it out and do whatever I want. So I'm going to give it a bit of padding just all the way around, and I'm going to change its color to be something like red or something. There we go. And you can see if you fill the percent up, the bar will fill up. So what you can also do is change your fill type. I know some games like Cyberpunk will use fill center horizontal, where as you change it, both sides are ticking down until it reaches the middle. I'm just going to set mine to fill left to right, so it fills from one side to the other, and I'm going to make it tick down over time, and then when it reaches the bottom, the option is selected. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a proper name. So I'm going to call it PB timed response for progress bar. I'm going to set the visibility to collapse, so it's not visible when we start the game. Now I'm going to jump into my graph, and if you jump into the dialogue event graph, you will see all the events that run to control the dialogue on the UI. The only one we're interested in is the event BP on dialogue replies available. This is what narrative calls when it needs to render replies on screen. So all I'm thinking is right before here, we're going to start our timer for our dialogue, and then it will go off and render all the other dialogues. And when the timer reaches 0, then we tell it to just hit, and then we action the timed event. So I'm going to come and create a function called create timed response, and it's going to have one input and it'll be a type of master dialogue, and I'll just call this dialogue. From here we can drag off and you should be able to access the variable you've created on the master, and then all we're going to do is check if it's greater than 0, because if it equals 0 then we don't want a timer, so we're not going to do anything. So false will just do nothing. However, if it's true, then we actually need to start actioning the timer. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag in our PB timed response, holding Control or Command to drop it in. And I will drag off and say set visibility and choose the function. Drag that into true and I'll set it to visible. So the progress bar is now visible. I'll paste it below and just connect it to the false and make it invisible. So this will fix a bug if we have a dialogue with multiple options and some of them might not have player timers. Next, we need a way to actually tick down the progress bar over time. So we're going to look at using timers, and a timer really needs two things in order to achieve what we want. We need the amount of time that's remaining and the time we've started from. So I'm going to come and create a new variable in here, and I'm going to call it player response time remaining, and I'm going to set it to a type of float. I'm going to set its category to player timed response, and then I'm going to click on it and click Control or Command D to duplicate it, and I will rename it to player response time total. And these are the two variables that are going to control the progress bar. So I'm going to drag in the player response time remaining, holding the Alt key to create a set, and I'll do the exact same thing for the total. And at the very start, we just want to set them to the same thing. So we can connect them together, and then we can plug it into the set visibility. And then if I right click, I can do get dialog, which will get the variable that we've created on the function at the start. And I can drag off and do get player timed response, and I can plug it in to the set there. So this has set our default variables. The next thing we need to do is begin the timer. So I'm going to drag off and I'm going to run the set timer by function name. The function name is, we're going to need to create a new function in a minute, which this timer will continuously call saying, are you done yet? Are you done yet? So I'm going to call mine check player timed response, and I'll set it to check every 1 second, and I'll tick looping. And that's all we need to do with the timer. Now, the only other thing we need to do with the timer is we need to drag off the return value and promote it to a variable, because otherwise we're not going to be able to cancel the timer once it's complete. It'll just keep running forever. And I will call this player response timer, and I'll also make it part of the category. I'm going to come down and just tick private on the wall because we don't want any other script accessing it outside of the narrative default UI. And I will also do the same on the create timed response. I will set its access modifier to private, and I'll set its category to player timed response. Now we actually need to create the function check player timed response, so we can actually check every time the timer runs. So I'm just going to come and create a new function at the top, and I'm just going to paste in our check timed response, and it's going to have no inputs, so that's nice and easy. And then all we do is we drag in the remaining time and we minus whatever the timer was. So if your timer is 1 second, I'm going to come and take 1 off of it like so. And then I will set the time remaining back to what we've just modified and then connect it up. Now that will begin every 1 second, ticking down our remaining time. Now after this is where we update the progress bar. So I'm going to drag off from this value and I'm going to do map range clamp. And what this is going to do is do all the maths logic we need in order to translate our value and the maximum value into the progress bar supported value. So in the value, drag in your remaining time. In A, leave it as 0 because that is the range of it. In B, we're going to drag in the total time. And then out range A is what we need the progress bar to be. So out range A will be 0 because it's between 0 and 1, like so. And now we're just going to drag in our progress bar, which I've just moved into the correct category. And I'm just going to do set %. And we can plug it into our map range clamp, and we can plug it all in nicely. So now we have it taking down our current time, and then we have it sorting the progress bar. The final thing we have to do is actually check if we've run out of time. So I'm going to drag the play response time remaining in, and I'm going to drag off and do less than or equal to 0, and I'm going to add a branch. So if we still have more than 0 time, then it's just going to be false and nothing's going to happen. We don't need to do anything. However, if it's true, it means we've run out of time. So in this tutorial, I'm actually going to show you 2 methods to achieve popular player timed response things. The first one we're going to do is it'll just select whichever option you're hovering over currently. So this is super easy. I'm just going to drag off from the true and just do handle enter key. So it'll basically just press enter on whatever response you've currently highlighted. So you pick a response and this will select it if you've not changed. Perfect. And now the last thing we need to do for this, ladies and gentlemen, is we actually need to cancel this timer if the player picks an option in time. So I'm going to come and create another function called end player response time. Then just like we did on the starting one, we need an input on here of the current dialog. So I'll just set it to dialog. And then I'm going to drag in our progress bar and I'm going to set it to invisible. So I'm going to set visibility and I'll set it to collapse just because we don't want it visible anymore after the option has been selected. Then I'm going to grab in our timer and I'm just going to call clear and invalidate timer by handle, which will clear the timer, close it off and dispose of it. And then the final thing we need to do, because if you come into your dialog and set the player timed response at a group of options, every option after that is going to be using the exact same time, which is not what we want. So after the timer, we're going to right click and I'm going to do get dialog, which is the variable we've just created. And I'm actually going to set the player timed response time back to 0, because then if we set it to 0, nothing will use it going forwards. And now we can compile and save that. The last thing we need to do is plug all this into our dialog. So just after the method event on dialog replies available, we're going to drag in our create timed response. and you'll see it only needs one variable, which is the dialog, which we need to simply cast our dialog to it. So I'm going to make myself a little bit of room, and I'm going to drag off from the dialog, and I'm going to do cast master dialog. This will attempt to cast it to our dialog with the variable, and if it casts successfully, then we can plug it into the dialog. So all you need to do is just make sure that the master dialog is connected to the create timed response correctly, and then it carries on afterwards. If you don't carry it on afterwards, no dialog will work. The next thing we need to do, because our create time response will begin the timer, that will also call check player time response, and then after that we just need to call end. So if you find your handle enter key method here, this is what narrative calls when an option has been selected. So after the false, you'll see it'll connect over to this for each loop here, but I'm just going to drag in our end player timed response here and plug it in there and over to the exec there. I'm also going to lengthen it a little bit and then give it a bit more room so we have more space. And I'm going to drag this over here like so. And then all we need to do is grab the current dialog and cast it to our master dialog like so. And I'm going to plug in the master dialog there and then connect it up. So as soon as the handle enter key function is called, whether it's the player pressing enter or clicking or whatever, it will come in, it will cast to the master dialog and then attempt to end the player response time. It may just actually come in and make an invisible thing already invisible and then clear a timer, but that's completely fine. Then all we need to do is copy this end player response time, and we also need to put it on the on dialog finished event at the end here. This is just in case after the play dialog options it ends, we don't want it pressing enter for the player when they're not there. And then just drag from the dialog all the way over here and do a cast master dialog and plug it in. And then we can just come back and we can just neaten up these horrible lines we've created, just like that. There we go, nice neatly, and comes up correct. And that should be it, ladies and gentlemen. So we can actually test this now by coming back to Hiroshi here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the class defaults and I'm just going to set it to 5. So at the moment the first batch of options we go to will take 5 seconds to run. So let's test it out. So I'm going to run up to hit Hiroshi now, which is this guy here, and I'm going to begin, and you'll see the dialog starts normal, but when we get to the player options the timer should show and start ticking down for 5 seconds. So you'll see, there we go, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it selected the first option. We had no choice. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. However, it's a bit glitchy. It kind of skips every second, which is not a very nice feature. And you can easily fix this by coming back to your back to your create timed response here. And if you reduce the time and then reduce the amount it takes off, you can actually make it go smoother, but remain the same amount of time. So for example, I've got it set to every 1 second. But if I set it to every 0.01 second, and then come and take that same amount off here, you've got to make sure you take the same amount off, otherwise the logic won't work. Now it will be a much smoother transition for the 5 seconds, which just looks better. So you can see if I come in now, you can see it's much more smoother, but it's still taking 2, 1, 5 seconds. Perfect. So it's pretty good that it does it on the first one, but we need a way to do it on any one we want. And that's where we come and create our own narrative event to handle this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to my events folder here, and I'm just going to right click narrative event, and I'm going to call it any set player timed response. And I'm going to open this up. I'm going to overwrite the execute event function, and from the narrative component I'm going to get the current dialog. I'm going to cast this to our master dialog so we've got access to the variables and plug it in. From here I can simply now call set on our player timed response time, and I can promote this to a variable so we can edit it, and then right at the end I will just add the return value. Then the only other thing we need to do is overwrite the get graph display text, delete the parent off. From the return value I'm just going to do a format, an append, where we drag in the player timed response, and I'm going to plug it into the B column. I'm going to set player time response to, and it'll print out the time for us. So I can now compile and save, and you will see I can come back to Hiroshi's dialog now, and I can click just in the dialog before we get to the options, and I can set the event that we've just created, and I'm going to set it to 5 seconds, and I'll do it at the end. So it sets it right in between here before it moves to the next one. And just as a test, I will set the class defaults to 0, so if it doesn't work, then it'll it'll just proceed with no timer. It should work. And now we can run up and I can interact with him, and you can see the timer's going down. If I switch to a different dialog option, when it hits the end, it will go, boom, it's selected that one. Perfect. Now I did say earlier we were going to do 2 versions of this. So the first version was it picks whichever option you've selected, and that works pretty well. However, we can improve it and maybe make it pick a specific dialog option by choice. So it very well may be that you have a dialog option, you're sat talking to him, and maybe he notices you're taking time in order to respond to him. So maybe he wants to say something like, look, I know you're nervous, don't worry about it, blah, 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 blah. You know, or come on, hurry up, answer me kind of thing. So what we can do with this is we can actually edit some little parts of our code that when it sets the player response, it also sets an ID of what dialog to call if it runs out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my master dialog and I'm going to create a new variable underneath this called player timed response ID, and I'm going to set it to a type of name, and I'm going to hit compile. And now if I jump back into Hiroshi here, you can see that in my class defaults I can now add an ID here, which just by default is none, which is fine. So I need a way to set this ID, so I'm just going to change my event here. I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to set it to a type of name, and then in my execute event just after this I'm going to drag from the master dialog and do set player timed response ID, and I can plug all this in and I can promote this to a variable. And now what you'll see, ladies and gentlemen, if we compile and save, we can come back to Hiroshi, and in our event we can now add an ID. So I already have this node here which basically says, look, I know you're nervous, don't worry, you'll do great, good luck. So it basically circumvents all of this here. So I'm going to come here and copy the ID of this node, and I'm going to paste it inside this timed response here. Now the only other thing we need to do is we actually need to tell the narrative UI to use this response if it's there. So I'm going to come back to the default UI, and inside check player timed response right at the end you'll see we have the handle enter key. So I'm going to drag this just up here for now and just unbreak it holding the alt key and clicking. So in order for it to actually pick a specific option, we basically need to tell narrative to restart the dialogue, but from a specific point. So from the true, so just under here, I'm going to right click and do get narrative component. And from here, I'm going to drag off and do begin dialogue. Connect this up to the true. So all we need to do now is populate this with the details of the dialogue we want to start. And then we can actually just populate the start from ID with whatever we've put in the event. And it will jump to that point. It will quickly end the current dialogue, which is what the player is, and then quickly start the other dialogue. So in order to get the dialogue, so you can either create a class on your event for which dialogue you want to start. But in my case, I'm going to probably always bind them right next to the actual player option. So from the return value of the narrative component, I'm just going to do get current dialogue, and I'm going to drag off and do get class, and I'm going to plug this in to the dialogue here. So this will basically say whichever the current dialogue is, just get the class of that and use that. And then because I'm doing that, I could also do the same for the default NPC avatar. So from current dialogue, I'm just going to do get NPC actor and plug that in as well. Now the final thing we need is the start from ID. So what I'm going to do is back in the create timed response where we populate all of the variables, I'm actually going to drag just after the timer, and from the dialogue I'm going to copy and paste it over here. I'm just going to do get time ID, get play response time ID, and I'm just going to promote this to a variable, move it into our correct category and plug it all in, and just set the ID to empty as well, just in case, like so. Now this should give us a variable that we can now use inside here, so we can actually call the correct start from ID. So as long as you have now populated the event ID here, we can come back and test it again. So before it would just select whichever option we were on. However, this time when the timer hits 0, it shouldn't pick any of them, and don't worry, stop being nervous. Boom. Haha, look friend, I can see you were nervous. There we go, ladies and gentlemen, we've done it. Perfect. So you'll see there was a little bug on mine, and if you've been following my previous tutorials, you will most likely have the same bug where the press E is still there, and that happens because as we end narrative's dialogue, it sets the player back to not busy, and then because he's not busy, the tick event will point forward, see that there's an NPC there, say press E to begin, but then we're instantly beginning it. So in a very short space of time, it does a lot of things, and this is really easy to fix. So I'm just going to basically come up to the functions on my master dialogue and create an override the on begin dialogue event here, and I'm just going to copy everything below and just paste it above like so, and just set it to is busy equals true, just like like that. If you have any dialogue which is free movement, this will also block you from doing other things whilst that dialogue is playing. That might be something you want. If you want the ability to say pick things up or shoot or talk to other NPCs while dialogue is going off, then you only set is busy if it's not free movement. But you can see now, if I try it again and run up to him, after the 5 seconds he will say his dialogue and then he'll say that, and then the text on screen has gone. Perfect. And now if you run up and test it, you can see as we talk to Rusty, if you get it where you have no UI available, just make sure on your narrative default UI inside your create time the response that you have plugged in the set visibility to both. Otherwise it'll make narrative invisible and you can't do anything. So now if I run up to Rusty, you will see he doesn't have time dialogue, so I can take as much time as I want to select it, and it's been over 5 seconds now. You can see nothing's happened, so I can press enter to go through all of his dialogue just fine. Otherwise I can run up to Hiroshi and I can talk to him, and you can see, oh no, I need to make an option, I'll pick that one. There we go. Perfect. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is 2 ways to create really nice dialogue in narrative. You have the one that presses enter straight away, or you have the one with a specific ID. One other option you could actually technically do is on the check player response time here, where you have the handle enter key or the begin dialogue, you could actually check based on the ID and perform one or the other. So for example, if I was to drag all of this begin dialogue just to the side and down a little, and the handle enter key to the top, if I copy this player time response just up here and say equals, just like that, and put another branch in to the true, I can say if we haven't given a response ID, so it's here, we can just drag up to the true like so. If we have given it one, then we can come down to the false and call it like so. So this means now it will do both actions. You may not want both, you may only want one of them, but otherwise you have the option to do both. And just as an advanced test, if I come up to my guy Tyler, and on his dialogue you can see he has quite a few player options. So what I can do is I can come to the first one and say you don't have a player option for that, you can do anything you want. However, if he says you've got good and then you take too long, so I'll say you've got 6 seconds to answer him for some reason 6, and if you don't answer him, then he will jump to a line of his own choosing, which will connect to the next set of player options, saying, haha, looks like a cat got your tongue, clearly scared of me. So he's going to taunt you even more if you don't respond in time. And that means on this one here, I can just come down and say, play that one after 6 seconds if the player hasn't chosen. So now if I do the final test, you can see I can run up to him, and the first option will give us unlimited time. We can pick whatever we want. I'll pick, say, that one, and then he'll taunt us a little bit more. And if we don't respond in time, then he's going to mock us even more. So you can see now, 6 seconds, haha, looks like a cat got your tongue, clearly scared of me. And now it goes to the next set of dialogue options, so the player can't access those. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? I hope this helped. If you've got any other suggestions, please let me know. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.